All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a completely fascinating report from the Center for Cyber Diplomacy and International Security, and it highlights a really wild modern paradox. We're talking about the incredible irony of a recent foreign operation that literally used American artificial intelligence to attack the exact infrastructure needed to build American artificial intelligence. I mean, it's a perfect closed loop of geopolitical competition. And the craziest part? The battlefield isn't some shadowy high-tech cyber realm. It's literally your local zoning board and community town hall.
So here is how we're going to unpack this today. We've got 5 main points: the irony of the operation, amplifying real vulnerabilities, the provincial contractor model, the infrastructure competition, and finally, the governance gap. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the irony of the operation.
Our explainer begins with a June 2026 threat report from OpenAI. They detected 2 very specific China-linked influence operations. The first one, which they called the data center bandwagon, was aimed squarely at U.S. AI infrastructure expansion. The second, tech and tariffs, targeted U.S. trade policy. And what's super interesting here is that these campaigns used highly specific prompts to mimic American political debates. The operators gave instructions on exactly who to include and exclude, like explicitly telling the AI to include President Trump in the generated content while completely excluding President Xi. It was a very intentional, carefully curated political framing.
Now, spoiler alert, these specific operations actually failed. They didn't gain any meaningful online traction, and the accounts were quickly banned. But, and this is a big but, we absolutely shouldn't write this off as just some clumsy mistake. Even though it didn't go viral, the strategic doctrine it tested is very much alive. Think of it like a dry run. The data they gathered from this attempt is for sure going to be used to refine their next move.
So you're probably wondering, right? Why on earth would a sophisticated foreign actor use ChatGPT, a highly traceable American product, to pull this off? Well, the answer is just pure economics. Using off-the-shelf commercial AI is drastically cheaper and faster than paying an entire warehouse full of human internet trolls. It's just a calculated risk. The crazy cost savings and the ability to scale up instantly simply outweigh the operational risk of getting caught by the platform's own security teams.
All right, moving on to part 2, amplifying real vulnerabilities.
This is where the strategy gets really dangerous. There's been a massive shift in modern influence operations. In the past, it was all about fabrication, just creating false information out of thin air, but that's pretty easy to fact-check and debunk. Amplification, on the other hand, is about boosting real, valid concerns held by actual people. The genius here, if you can call it that, is moving away from making things up and instead just quietly turning up the volume on authentic American grassroots disputes. Because the underlying concerns are totally real, the foreign interference becomes practically indistinguishable from normal, organic democratic debate.
And they knew exactly what to amplify. The concerns being voiced by communities in places like Virginia, Texas, Iowa, and across the Southeast are totally 100% legitimate. Everyday people are genuinely worried about the massive energy demands of these AI data centers. They're worried about the intense water consumption, the huge amounts of land they take up, the pressure on local power grids, and the constant humming noise they bring to their hometowns.
To put that into perspective, just look at this number, 36. That is the number of U.S. data center projects that were blocked or delayed by local opposition between May 2024 and June 2025 alone. This is a very real domestic reality. In fact, it's such a pressing issue that we've seen lawmakers from completely opposite sides of the aisle, from Senator Bernie Sanders to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, proposing legislation for a moratorium on new data centers just so we can figure out some national safeguards.
And this quote from the OpenAI threat report really hits the nail on the head. Foreign influence operations have long sought to latch on to existing local issues and sincerely held beliefs, using them to build credibility, amplify divisions, or exacerbate public distrust. Basically, if the main obstacle to U.S. AI dominance isn't a lack of engineering talent, but actually local domestic politics, well, then inserting foreign bots into those town hall debates becomes a highly effective competitive strategy. They don't have to invent a roadblock, they just make the existing roadblock significantly heavier.
Which brings us to Section 3, the provincial contractor model.
So who is actually running these operations if it's not some centralized intelligence agency? The report outlines a really fascinating 4-step structure. It starts with the fake social media accounts, right? Those are actually run by a private Chinese tech contractor. That contractor is hired by provincial government clients, and those provincial clients are ultimately the ones fulfilling the central government's intent. It's like a giant puzzle designed specifically to create a chain of deniability, completely insulating the central government from ever getting caught red-handed.
This whole commercially driven setup provides some massive operational advantages. First off, deniability. You have to make multiple inferential leaps to prove where the orders originally came from. Second, scalability. A commercial company can just run campaigns across dozens of platforms all at once. And third, insulation. If the operation gets exposed, like this one did, the private contractor can just be completely disavowed and the government walks away untouched.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, the infrastructure competition.
Because this really isn't about winning arguments on social media. It's about concrete, cooling towers, and power grids. To understand why this matters so much, we have to talk about frontier AI models. These are the most advanced systems in the world, and their capabilities are primarily determined by the sheer, massive scale of the physical compute infrastructure they're trained on. Right now, the US has a huge advantage in this physical infrastructure. Our competitors know that, and they know the only way to catch up is to drag American momentum down.
So, what we're seeing is a total evolution in geopolitical strategy. The old target, think back to 2016 through 2020, was mostly about electoral interference and just broadly sowing social division. The new target is way more specific: economic and infrastructure policy delays. Adversaries are figuring out that if they can't get around our hardware export controls, they can at least try to stall the zoning permits required to plug American AI data centers into the power grid.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, the governance gap.
This is honestly the most pressing issue in this whole report, because right now we have practically no defense against this. We have seen some recent policy actions. The Great American AI Act of 2026 tackles AI impersonation and financial crimes, and the Trump administration's June 2 executive order set up a cybersecurity clearinghouse. But here's the massive blind spot. While everyone is prepping for AI-driven election interference and deepfakes, these frameworks completely miss the threat of foreign actors hijacking local infrastructure and zoning debates.
And to make matters worse, our existing legal toolkit is just completely outdated for this. Laws like the Foreign Agents Registration Act or the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, they simply weren't designed for a world where a provincial contractor uses an American AI chatbot to amplify a perfectly legitimate zoning dispute in Iowa. The governance gap is glaring. In fact, the hostile conduct documented in this report might not even technically violate a single current U.S. law.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly critical question. If the ultimate geopolitical competition of the 21st century is quite literally being fought at your local zoning board, how are we supposed to separate organic, real citizen voices from foreign digital amplification? It's a fundamental challenge that strikes right at the core of both our technological future and our local democracy. It's absolutely something we are all going to need to keep a close eye on. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning what you read online.